Hello and welcome to another edition of The Tigers Down Under. I'm your host, Alex, and with me I have Logan. How are you, Logan?
Doing all right, Alex? Good to be back.
Yeah, well, look, we thought we'd do this special episode. We recorded our flashback episode of the decade that was for Hull City yesterday, which will go to air on YouTube in the coming week. But we sort of mentioned on that that look, with the COVID cases in the UK and the implications it could have on City, even though we haven't had a game since our last episode, we thought we'd do this special episode just to talk about that and sort of the implications on City's season and also football in general. So I guess, starting point, Logan, I mean, number of games that are being called off. I think there was only 5 games this morning as basically a complete round of League One fixtures. What's your concerns or what's your feelings around the state of play at the moment in the league?
Yeah, interesting. I think that it probably, as you've kind of alluded to already, it touches on different ramifications for different teams. And given their injury situations, and I guess the thing that is somewhat concerning is there doesn't seem to be a real clear criteria of what constitutes a team being able to play and not able to play. So I guess it's these late diagnoses where you kind of go ahead and let a fixture take place, and then a few days later we find out that one of the players that you played against or in your squad potentially may have been a close contact or have in fact contracted COVID-19. So I guess that the concerns for the Football League are trying to make decisions that cater for everyone and don't really provide any real huge benefit or advantage to some clubs and not others. So I guess primarily the player safety should be the number one concern. And although as a football fan, it's very selfish for us to sit back and wish that there were games being played. And I know certainly speaking, this festive season or festive period didn't feel the same as it normally does, being able to watch City play. But ultimately, we want to finish the league, and we want to make sure that the league is finished well with the integrity of it being upheld as well. And that means playing teams at their best and making sure that the players are looked after. So I guess overall, that's the big things that kind of concern me.
Yeah, and look, we were sort of talking before we went to air that I think over 40,000 new cases in the UK yesterday, which was the second day in a row that they were setting a new record, which is really concerning in the sense that it sort of harkens back to early March, April sort of figures where it's sort of even spiraling further than that. And you touched on there really interestingly the fact that we're concerned and we want to be able to ensure that the season can finish. There's got to be some doubts or some concerns kind of creeping in now that, I mean, granted, there's the vaccine that could potentially alleviate a lot of this, but, you have to look back to 6 months ago that League One and League Two were suspended and didn't finish their seasons on the back of a huge disruption from the virus. And we're already seeing teams, Accrington Stanley, Sunderland, who have only played 16 or 17 games, which are, 4 or 5 games behind a whole host of other clubs. Where you kind of think maybe we get to a point where the season does have to at least be temporarily suspended, if not permanently for the season. What are your thoughts on the potential, I guess, of the season being abandoned?
Well, I think there's a few things that you have to look at in that as well. Is if you were to abandon the season, probably I think is something that would have to almost rule out initially, given the fact that the reluctancy of the Football League, given the amount of games that have already been played. I think that would be important. But theoretically, if we were to move the yardstick and put in a suspended or paused season, so to speak, then those games still have to be played, and the backlog of games that might leave for players towards the end of the season. Again, when you consider the amount of games that are already played, particularly in the lower tiers of English football, to try and condense them into a shorter period would have a very catastrophic effect, I guess, on player well-being, given the fact that circumstances just in normal life aren't really the same at the moment due to these the restrictions and just the way that I guess the world has changed in light of how we're supposed to live now to care for each other. So when you think about burdening players with further games in that period again, there's a huge mental health consideration as well, but as physically, you just wonder how's that going to actually be played out. And and will the league still be kind of the same if we're asking players to be playing 3 games a week, thereabouts, in a really condensed time period, particularly if they've taken time off. It's a huge ask, and just what that does for the league. I think if you have to play so many of those back-to-back games, does the standard of football drop considerably, particularly teams in a relegation battle or a promotion fight? It's a really difficult one. I don't think I've got the answers, but you can just see so many different problems arise from what seems like a good idea now to postpone it, how it might catch up with them. Alternatively, in the season.
Yeah, and look, and then you've also got the concerns about the fact that we've got the Euros theoretically happening in the next off season, which presumably, because everything's just been thrown out of whack with the way that the last season finished. So you've got this season already playing catch up just to finish at the end of the time frame of a normal season, which is sort of first week of May essentially. Which means we're already playing catch up. Even if no games this season had been postponed, it was already quite a condensed schedule. And then you consider the fact that, yes, there's not many clubs that would be impacted by the Euros at our level. I don't think Northern Ireland qualified, and Josh Magennis would be our only player, I think, who'd be affected. Maybe James Scott with Scotland as well, not sure. But you've got that tournament. Whether that tournament even goes ahead, I'm not sure. I mean, it all really depends on how Europe gets its cases under control. But as you're saying, it's a real race against time to get these fixtures finished, and in such a condensed period that I know that officials have been talking in the last few days about the potential for a 1 week or 2 week suspension of all of the leagues, Premier League down, just to sort of act as a circuit breaker and try and get the cases under control. But then, yeah, as you say, it then has implications down the track of where you pick up these missed fixtures and what that means for the league, whether the league sort of, it gets to a point where it acknowledges maybe we can't complete all of the fixtures. We play for a 35 game season, and we kind of get all the clubs to agree that 35 games is enough to have a fair season. But then you've still got the fact that, okay, then everyone doesn't play each other twice. Like, I'm sort of spitballing things here, but there's a number of different factors to consider on how to finish the season fairly and safely for the players, the personnel, the staff, everyone involved. That also is fair for the teams battling promotion and relegation.
Absolutely. And taking it even back to a city standpoint here, we don't even really know what's been reported for the amount of cases, or if it was a sole case, even in our circumstance. So we obviously know that Kane Lewis Potter had issues with it earlier, but I think that was more just being a direct contact. I don't believe that was actually reported that he'd contracted it himself. But again, we obviously we know that our fixtures are the ones that are being postponed, along with many other clubs. But is that because we have a close contact? Is it because we have 3 players with it? It's been really interesting to see the way City have remained very coy and very private in what they've kind of allowed to be reported back. Which I find really interesting, because it's obviously enough for the Football League to have heard our concerns and run with it and accept that we're unable to play those fixtures. And really, it's the fact that it wasn't just the sole fixture that was cancelled. There was multiple fixtures. It does make us wonder what's actually going on behind closed doors.
Yeah, and I was going to bring about the City following that, which was the interesting fact, as you're sort of saying, we don't really know what the issue is with City, but it seems as if it sort of revolves around that Ipswich game, where I think a lot of the Ipswich players and staff seem to have contracted the virus maybe before the game even. And then, as you say, whether it's just that our players are being treated as close contacts for the Ipswich players, whether some of the players have now contracted it, it's really unclear. And I guess what we do know is, we've had the Sunderland game suspended, and also the Lincoln game, which would have been this morning, was also suspended. Which, in a way, I think there's been a few managers who've kind of come out and said it's happened at a good time for City. It's good in the sense that we get George Honeyman back to full fitness. You would think we get a few of the players back to full fitness, and hopefully, rested legs for players like Josh Emmanuel, who've been running through games, Greg Doherty, stuff like that. It's an interesting one, though, as well, because, as we're saying, it then leaves us with a big pile up of games, and now we're 4 points off the leaders, I believe. So 4 points behind Lincoln. Yeah, 34 points for us, 38 for Lincoln, because I believe they had a game over the weekend against Burton. Even just the fact that, we're sort of slipping down the table, you kind of start to feel that pressure to catch up on the league leaders.
And let's not forget that those fixtures, as you've already mentioned, that we didn't end up getting to play, they're huge fixtures in the scheme of the season. We're talking about real 6-pointers. And so, whilst we can look at it as a positive that it kind of stopped our rot, or potentially may have stopped the rot that had set in at City, those games still have to be played. And if they get placed into other difficult areas of the season, where we could end up finding ourselves in a situation where we play 3-4 back-to-back 6-pointer games, which if you're flying with momentum, perhaps that can be a good thing. But I tend to look at it as more of a concern, as far as they're kind of the make or break, games that really, define your season.
And if you and sort of as we were talking last season as well, the huge risk is the fact that if you have a player who picks up a really innocuous sort of injury that's, a 1 or 2 week injury, in a normal season, that means that they miss a game or two. If you're playing these games in such a condensed manner, you end up missing 4 or 5 games, which is hugely significant on your season. So, for instance, George Honeyman having the hamstring tightness that he had, if he was to pull a hamstring in the game against, say, Sunderland, and then is out for a stretch of 4 or 5 games in what would otherwise just be a 1 or 2 week injury, it has a huge impact on your season and on your form. So, there's a number of aspects that are kind of concerning about the way the season's unfolding. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens. I suspect, we're sort of reaching breaking point, I think, when you've got, 5 games being played this morning constituting a full round of fixtures. It's, less than half the games. I suspect you're going to need 1 or 2 more sides amongst those to have any issues to sort of see the league have to do something, because you get to a point where the league starts to lose a bit of credibility if they're not able to fulfill the majority of the fixtures. It's interesting. I mean, they're saying that we're going to be playing this weekend against Charlton, but whether that means that, some of the sides might be coming out the other side of it, that they're coming out of that isolation period and things return to normal. But it's going to be very interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And even just touching on that Charlton fixture, I mean, if you look at the table and where City sit, having that game in hand now, if Charlton were to beat us on the weekend, then it puts us right back into the kind of the final places in the playoff positions, which is an incredibly precarious place to be, considering only a few short weeks ago we were league leaders with games in hand, so to speak. So again, I think the COVID implications are far and widespread, and it's going to be fascinating to see how the league decides to deal with it.
Yeah. I would also sort of intended to have a look at fixtures played this morning that really impacted on us. But it looks like in the whole, the games played this morning really were amongst sides towards the bottom of the table. However, I guess the real interesting result that we sort of drew attention to before we went to air was the Shrewsbury win over Blackpool. And Shrewsbury now have put 4 wins in 5 together, beating some of the real top sides, including ourselves. And really sort of starting to climb that table. So, and that sort of comes since they changed their manager a few weeks ago. So, it's always interesting when that sort of, we might have a result that looks really calamitous as it first happens, and then within a few games, it's sort of given a bit of context, it actually ends up being a case of, okay, well, we're not the only ones that have suffered a defeat at the hands of Shrewsbury. They're actually starting to put a decent season together.
And I guess that's the Football League. We understand that we've become very accustomed to watching these teams go on runs, and momentum is just incredibly important. It's funny what it can actually do to a season. I mean, you mentioned on the last podcast when we spoke about where we sat in the league at Christmas time and where Stoke were, and how that kind of reversed right around, and we saw them go on an extreme charge while we, obviously we know our fate. And exact same thing. What's happening with a team like Shrewsbury? And again, going back to what COVID implications could even mean for a team like that, to be 4 wins out of 5, and then if they were to be postponed and have a couple of games off, that could halt that kind of momentum that's happening. So it's a really fascinating time, and as you mentioned, it's what we kind of expect, that teams like Shrewsbury or your lower league teams that at first it appears like a really bad loss, but ultimately once they kind of get their systems down pat and start to work out, how what their best side is and get a little bit of kind of headwinds, you really can see this table change extremely quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I was thinking we'll do a preview of that Charlton game in a second, but just before that, it's been interesting the last few days. I saw Tony Pulis had been sacked by Sheffield Wednesday after, I think, 45 days in charge or something. It was a very, very short reign for him at Sheff Wednesday. And, the usual sort of Twitter in the know accounts or rumor mongers sort of pop up. And one that caught the eye of a few City supporters was the rumor that Sheffield Wednesday were interested in Grant McCann. And the reaction was pretty telling, I think, from City supporters, with many offering to drive him over there themselves. But what do you make of that rumor? Do you think there's anything in it at all, or do you think it's more wishful thinking than anything?
I think it has to be wishful thinking. It would be. We talked about it last podcast as well, actually. But the contrast of how would you sack a manager that, well, at the point of the time when we discussed it, we were top of the league. Granted, we'd had a few bad results, so it would be a really surprising move considering that Grant McCann is a yes man. I don't think that the owners are in any way kind of inclined to move him on. He seems to do what they require from him by simply nodding his head and fulfilling whatever's asked of him. So from that standpoint, it'd be a big surprise for a team to kind of lure him away. I think from a City standpoint, we've kind of, the fact that we're having this discussion probably shows the fact that not too many people would harbour a huge amount of resentment or regret if we were to see him go. I saw a lot of calls on those on social media about, let's get Adkins back. Like that was kind of the.
Is he still out of work?
I believe he's still unemployed at the moment, and so. Whether that would be a consideration, I struggle to see how he could come back and work with the current owners in any way. But it just, I guess, what it highlighted to me was the affiliation that that City fans do have with some of our previous managers and the way that they feel about them. And Grant McCann doesn't seem to have connected with the fans in that way yet, despite having a really promising season so far. So. Really interesting, but I don't think there's too much in the rumours just yet, and I would be really surprised. I did notice that Sheff Wednesday actually picked up a win this morning too. I
saw that, yeah.
So, whether Grant McCann is the right man for the job there, I would be very surprised if he were.
Yeah, I'd have to question the logic of bringing in a manager whose only track record in the Championship was to get a side relegated from an almost unrelegatable position. So it would be a very odd move, I suspect. Speaking of former managers, I haven't actually seen the video myself, but had you seen that Leonard Slutsky's been making YouTube fame for, I think, doing a karaoke rendition of All I Want for Christmas Is You?
I did see in the City group that there was a video of him, but it was all in the Russian text, and I didn't. But then I did see Twitter rumblings about it after, so I think that's probably my first job on this podcast to go off and watch Leonard serenading the people that he was with.
Yeah, he is a character. I'll always miss the sort of the quirky traits of his, going to the Hull Fair and doing all sorts of pretty quirky little things.
Yeah, it was a very, very interesting character, and one again we just come back to these managers that people seem to resonate with, and nobody really had any beef with Slutsky, although the results were kind of inconsistent to say the least. We were scoring goals, and the fact that he was just such an interesting and engaging guy. He seemed to have a lot of left a legacy that reminds us and has a lot of warm feelings when we think about Leonard.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll quickly have a look ahead at this Charlton fixture, which knock on wood, it will go ahead this weekend. Charlton's still managed by Lee Boyer, who sort of similar to Grant McCann was in charge there when they were relegated at the end of last season, and then sort of similar to us, they've had a reasonable start to life in League One. I think they're sort of coming from a little bit further back than us, but it's at a point now where if we're to lose to Charlton, they'll actually go ahead of us in the table this weekend. I think they've got one win in their last five, or we also have one win in our last five, but we've lost our last three, whereas they've picked up a win and 2 draws in their last 3. So, reasonably better form than us going into this clash on the weekend. Having not played a game in I guess coming up to 10 days now or something like that for us. What are your expectations for this game? Are you sort of, I mean, I haven't really seen any team news necessarily for the squad, so I'm sort of expecting a fully fit squad would be available for the game. So in that sense, I'd be expecting Honeyman to be starting the game alongside Smallwood. So it gives us a much stronger midfield group. I know we were sort of talking before we went to air as well about your concern regarding yellow card accumulation and what it could mean.
Yeah, I did. I was reading up on the Daily Mail actually released the information about the players that we have walking the tightrope, and because that Sunderland fixture was supposed to be our 19th game before it was postponed, Callum Elder, Richie Smallwood, and George Honeyman, incidentally, are the 3 players that if they were to pick up a red card, a yellow card in the next fixture, which happens to be our 19th fixture against Charlton this weekend, then that would consequentially result in a suspension. So I guess when we consider, we've harped on a lot about it in recent times about the value of George Honeyman to the side. It seems like it would be a huge shame for him to come back in to the squad, assuming that he's fit, and pick up that card, and then we obviously be without him for some pretty critical fixtures given our position at the moment. So I guess, I mean, if Smallwood was to pick one up, I think that we could probably cover. We seem to have a lot of strength. So probably if Elder was to go, you'd consider playing one of our right backs in his position.
Or Fleming, yeah.
Fleming, that's right. So I don't think that we're incredibly out of depth in that, but I think the George Honeyman picking up a card would be, incredibly dire for us at this point in the season.
And look, I mean, I guess he's on 4 yellow cards for a reason. I'll always think back to, I can't remember which fixture it was now, but there was one particularly cynical yellow card I can remember from him right at the end of a game. It might have been against Ipswich potentially, where he sort of just rugby tackled one of the players right at the end of the game to stop a break on the counter. So he is known for taking one for the team, so to speak, and I hopefully he has been informed that the case is that if he gets a yellow card in this fixture, it will mean a 1-game ban. So hopefully the players are a bit mindful of that and it doesn't impact things too much. For the game itself, do you have any sense of how this will go? Are you sort of expecting or hoping for a win, or would a point sort of do at this stage?
I think that this throwing in the added kind of intrigue of what are they going to do at this stage. We assume the game is on. What's this break done to the squad? Has the rest been good or has it been detrimental? We just don't know. This is an incredibly interesting fixture to pick. I think, as you've mentioned, even looking at the form guides, there's 2 teams who still sit incredibly high up in the ladder around those playoff positions and automatic spots. But just the frailties of the last couple of weeks and seeing games being cancelled and the real team with Lincoln just pulling away. This is a huge fixture for us in the context of this. This is beyond what we would even call a 6-pointer, because, as I mentioned before, if we were to lose this game, we really push ourselves down to outside the 6. And I say push ourselves down because it seems to be that our form has been so much about us beating ourselves as opposed to teams outclassing us. I think that was very evident in the Portsmouth game as well. I think we have to be targeting this game as a victory. We need 3 points, and I think anything short of 3 points will certainly feel like failure, given the fact we've had this rest, we've had the time off. We assume that we get everyone back to full fitness, and I think that's crucial. So, look, I'm going to stay positive here. I think that's going to be a really good return to form game for us, and I do fancy City to pick up a result here, but I cannot stress. I feel that this is certainly our biggest game of the season.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I think in a similar way to last season, those first few games back from the COVID break were really crucial for us to sort of get back to winning ways. And from memory, I can't remember which was the first game back, but I know we certainly didn't pick up a win for a couple of games until that Middlesbrough win, and that really sort of didn't give us any sort of momentum or any hope of staying up. And I know this break's obviously a lot shorter. It's only about 10 days or so. But similarly, like you're saying, I think it's very crucial to see how we bounce back from not only the form slump, but also the break in fixtures, and how we can sort of get back to winning ways, and get back to a really positive approach to the season. So I agree. I think it's more than just the points on offer in this game. It's about the performance and the self-belief getting back into the side. So I'd like to say we'll win. I really would. I'll probably say we'll just edge it. I think it'll be a very nervy game. But yeah, look, if we're able to pick up the 3 points in this one, I think it'll go a long way to sort of calming the nerves, getting us back on track, and ready to face the teams in our schedule coming up. But that's sort of fingers crossed at this stage that the game actually goes ahead. So, thank you for joining me for it was a pretty important episode, I think, to sort of talk about all these implications of COVID on the season.
My pleasure. And let's hope that next time we're talking, we're discussing an incredibly positive return to form and a really optimistic outlook for 2021.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully we've got a game to talk about, and that we're not sort of kicking our feet together, sort of wondering what to do while we wait for the season to really kickstart again. But look, it was a great episode, and just remind everyone as well that keep an eye out for the decade flashback episode that will be going to air next week. It was a really great one to look back at the first half of the 2011-12 season under Nigel Pearson. So that was a great chat as well. So keep an eye out for that one to come. But until next time, hopefully there's 3 points on offer and to discuss in our next episode. So until next time, come on, City.